Welcome back to another episode of the Best You podcast, where we teach you the healthy habits that you need to look and feel like your best you. Today, we have an extraordinary guest, Matt Dawson, a former M&A investment banker who made the incredible transition from a 15-year career in finance to becoming a multi-record holding endurance and adventure athlete. In this episode, we dive into the mental and physical resilience required to push through extreme challenges, both in sports and in life. Matt shares the mental structures and thought patterns that have helped him endure some of the world's most grueling expeditions, including summiting the 7 summits, skiing to the South Pole, traversing the Mojave Desert, and rowing across the Atlantic Ocean. We also discuss how to set and achieve both psychological and physical goals, and Matt offers his unique perspective on moving past the inevitable letdown after accomplishing a big goal. By the end of the conversation, you're going to have actionable insights on how to cultivate endurance during physical and mental struggles, set meaningful goals, and keep pushing forward even after major achievements. But before we dive in, don't forget to hit the follow button on the Apple Podcast app and on Spotify. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit like and subscribe there as well so you never miss an episode that's jam-packed with health and fitness and wellness insights. For those of you guys I have not yet met, my name is Nick Carrier, and I'm a body optimization coach and creator of the 10-week transformation that has transformed the body and the mind of over 700 people so far. The 10WT makes it simple for former athletes who struggle to prioritize their health and fitness to regain the confidence in their bodies that they once had. To learn more about the 10WT and maybe even join, then go to nickcarrier.com/10WT. But for now, it's time to get closer and closer to your best you with Matt Dawson. All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Best You podcast. Today, I am really excited to be joined by the one and only Matt Dawson. Dawson, as you have allowed me to call you, really appreciate you joining today, man. I've been really looking forward to diving into the mental side of training and the mental benefits that we get from training and so many different things. So the way I want to start off is giving everybody a little bit more context on your story. I know at age 40, you basically kind of ditched your career in finance to pursue the career that you kind of originally founded because you have this passion for endurance and adventure sports. So talk to us about how that jump took place. Like, what was the realization that made you be like, okay, this is now the time to make a jump? Because after having kind of like plummeted into something for 15 years, it can be a difficult thing to just completely change trajectories of your career.
Yeah, no, look, that's a great question. I think it just kind of gets down to that. You can't rationalize your way through everything, and especially in a career in finance, you're using your mental capacity, all the time, making all these analyses and such. But it just came down to a point where something deep inside me told me it was time for a change. And the extent of change I needed to make wasn't going to be made, reading a book here or there, or talking with a therapist once a week, or going to a new art class, or, whatever you want to call it. Is just like, it needed to be a substantive change. I needed to change almost everything, about my life. And it's kind of that old adage of it's never too late to become what you might have been. I finally had the ability to step back, get out of my head, start to get down into my heart, and to listen to myself. And because I think deep down, a lot of times we have the answers that we're searching for, that we're either unwilling or unable to listen to them. So that was really the biggest point that helped me make that change or prepare to start making that change in my life.
Well, I would say, what's the catalyst then that allowed you to be able to actually hear that internal voice or be able to sense that gut feeling of like, now is the actual time? Because I'm sure there was 15 years. I'm sure there was little whispers, if you will, of this isn't that you need to change what you're doing. You need to change what you're doing. But for some reason, it was loud enough at this particular point in time. Like, what do you think that was?
It reached that final kind of critical point. Is that, to your point, it had been growing and growing and growing. And, I tried to feel at this, I'd felt this hole inside of me. I mean, for decades. And no matter what I did or what I put in it, it never seemed to help. So I'd reach a certain level of success professionally where I was very comfortable, could have everything that I wanted within reason from material goods. And if the hole, looked like a motorcycle, I'd put a motorcycle in there. Then it would change shapes. If it looked like a trip somewhere, I'd take the trip. Then it would change shapes. This hole just kept changing shapes. And no matter what I did, it just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And it just got to that point of, it's, it's kind of like, being sick and tired of being sick and tired. And, there's a lot of different ways you can look at it, but it just reached that critical mass where I was just tired of it. And I didn't want to go on. And it's just if the thought of looking out another couple decades from where I was, even though on the outside of my life, it looked like I was in a great position, had friends and family and all these means and resources, this and that. But internally, I was struggling, and I was essentially just kind of dead inside. I was very numb. I couldn't feel emotions outside of, pain and anger and frustration. And it just got to that point where it's just, look, man, it's like, I've got to make a decision one way or another. I'm either checking into life or I'm checking out of life, and it's just kind of that point. And finally I was able to make that decision. And really that was a big turning point. But what I came to learn was that was just the start. That was just the start of a greater process that has followed on, since that time.
Yeah, well, we're going to get into some of like your world records and the mental capacity that you need in order to be able to sustain some of the crazy endurance feats that you've done. But I want to stay on this for maybe just a little bit longer. When you made that decision of, okay, I'm going to leave this career in finance and go into endurance adventure sports, like what was the first step? Like how did you try to think about, what do I just love to do and I want to go do that? Were you trying to think of a business model? What was the first step in making your transition?
That's a great question, because you hear all these things of, oh, I made this transition in my life, but then when you actually put pen to paper, it's like, how do you do it? Because logistically there's a lot involved. So with me, it took several years. Is that in 2016 is kind of what we're talking about this transition I went through. Is, long story short, in 2016 I left Los Angeles. I flew to Nepal and spent 3 weeks hiking largely alone around Mount Everest. Went to base camp and did a couple other trails or things in that area. And it was on that trip that I had this breakdown and a breakthrough when I visited a Buddhist service at a monastery in Tengbo Che, there deep in the Himalayas. And, I realized through that experience that I wasn't living with any sense of purpose, and then my life was only about me. And I knew in that moment that, what my purpose was to try to help others to identify and live their purpose, and to avoid the pain and confusion and frustration that I faced alone for so many decades. Because I know what it is to be lost alone in that darkness, and what a terrible place it is. And I want to try to help people to avoid that and live more purposeful and fulfilling lives. So I knew what I wanted to do finally, but how do you go about doing that? I mean, if you look into classifieds, purpose finder helper doesn't exist. So, look at the logistics of it is, I literally spent about 2.5 years after that point in 2016, traveling as I could, climbing a couple other big mountains. To your point is I started to fall in love with the endurance stuff and with high altitude training and high altitude performance and mountain climbing. And before that time, I'd never done any of that stuff. I'd always been an athlete my entire life, but this was a completely new realm of athletics and performance I'd never been involved with. And it took about 2.5 years for it finally to come to mind. And it eventually happened on Mount Elbrus, which is the highest peak in Europe, which is in Russia, is that maybe there's a way to start an organization where I can start to pursue these activities that I'm enjoying, like mountain climbing and endurance stuff and adventure related elements, but apply that to help others, identify and live with this greater sense of purpose. So that's how the organization Dawson's Peak Foundation, our 501c3, came about. And our entire mission is to inspire people to live lives of greater purpose, and to understand that our lives are not just about us, but it's about what we can do with our lives to elevate those around us. So, logistically is I contacted a very good friend of mine, Jay Jablonski, who's the co-founder of Dawson's Peak. I told him my idea, and we really just kind of started putting it together, just kind of started brainstorming of what can we do. And we eventually settled on our concept of is that we create these large global one-off adventure related kind of projects where our athletes are going out there, pushing the boundaries of human capability, whether it be mentally, physically. Then that way the viewers can watch our athletes and draw parallels between themselves and the athletes. And they say, well, if this person's climbing an actual ocean or crossing a mountain, or reverse that, crossing a mountain, climbing an ocean, or what I'm saying, is that they can say, hey, if this person can do this, then maybe I can do this. And it is kind of overplayed, like what's your Everest or what's your this. That's kind of played out, I think, in my opinion. But that's essentially, what we're doing, where someone can face a challenge in their life that they've been scared, to address, or they think they can't overcome it, or whatever, and to say, hey, if this person's doing this, I can do this. And that's really kind of the crux of it. But it's, and we can delve into it more if you want to, but the logistics behind all that kind of stuff was just absolutely massive. And with the interesting part is that, when you think about what we've been able to accomplish over the past couple of years, setting multiple world records and going all over the world and this and that, that's all well and good, but that's the fun stuff. That's what you see. That's like on the field stuff. And I thought when we got kicked off, that was going to be the greatest challenge. Like, oh my God, climbing Everest, rowing the Atlantic, like this is going to be, all this stuff. But when you delve into it, a lot probably with what you experience as well, is the day-to-day organizational stuff and logistics have been a tremendous challenge, and probably taken even more time and effort than the fun stuff you see on the front end.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, a few things I just want to point out real quick before we move on is like, when you first made the transition, you didn't exactly know what that transition was going to be to, but you had to spend 2.5 years gaining clarity. And so I think a lot of times people want clarity on what their next steps are right away, or they want clarity before they actually make the jump. But it's like, sometimes you need to make the jump in order to get clarity, and sometimes it's going to take time. So I feel like you did a really good job of doing that. And then the other way you got clarity was like having a discussion with your friend. Is like, sometimes you need to have somebody else to ping pong ideas back and forth with, so that you can gain insights from them. You can gain insights from yourself that you wouldn't otherwise have if you didn't have a conversation with somebody else. So I think that was really great with regards to how you got clarity. I kind of want to jump right into some of the mental state and mental thought patterns, if you will, because I think that's what a lot of people are going to really enjoy today. So not too long ago, you set a world record of crossing the Mojave Desert, which is 329.35 miles. And you did a world record of 7 days, 8 hours, and 45 minutes. World record that's solo and unsupported. I know that there was a lot of different grueling times during it, but I know that the last 72 miles you had to do in 36 hours with no sleep. So what are some of the thought patterns that keep you going during times of like extreme pain, struggle, and discomfort that prevent you from quitting and keep you moving at a particular pace that you need to be moving at?
Yeah, no, look, that's, I keep saying these are just, very insightful questions. And it's things that I think about, on a continuous basis. It's, really when you're in those times, and the two greatest things that kept going through my mind on that particular crossing were surrender and perspective. Is, the big thing that we talk about is strength and surrender. Because, so many times, everybody wants to talk about, being tough and breaking down walls and pushing through and all this kind of stuff. And that's all well and good. And there's certainly times to be tough and hard and mean and, destroying things in front of you and attacking things and all that kind of stuff. But what I've found is my greatest strength in this project, overall, and in that one individual crossing you're talking about, has come through surrender. What I mean by that is, you surrender into the moment, you surrender into the pain, you surrender to the confusion, you surrender into all these things. And what I mean by that is by surrendering is you move towards your fears and your concerns and hesitations and trepidations, and you allow them to move into you as well. Yet the key is you remain unmoved. It's where they don't have the potential of taking root inside of you and moving you and influencing you unnecessarily. So how do you apply that for the crossing is, when you get in those moments, and I was certainly in them, where, the pain was excruciating at points, where I thought I had, stress fractures in my feet, and that, my feet were so blistered every time I was walking, I could feel them squishing around. My socks were filled with pus and blood and this and that. My groin had basically exploded. And I mean, it was just oozing pus down both legs. And, I'm out there alone in the desert, like, what the hell am I doing? If you can't find some way of dealing with that, then that's when you get just absolutely buried in these times. And again, what I use is just, surrender into those moments. Is you learn when to fight and when not to fight, and just kind of go with it. But kind of accompanying that strength and surrender is just perspective. Is like, a lot of people say embrace the suck. which, personally, I don't like that. A lot of times I think it's just completely overused and used wrong these days, because all these things that we get ourselves, or most of these things we get ourselves into, they don't suck and they're not suffering. They're difficult. And there's a tremendous difference between difficulty and suck and suffering. In my mind, suck and suffering is you get a phone call and someone you care about has a terminal illness, or you're a POW, in Vietnam, or you get in an accident, you lose a leg. It's like things like that. It's, we're in these difficult times. We consciously put ourselves in these difficult times because they're difficult. I'm looking for this difficulty. So why not embrace it? Why turn around and say, it sucks and you need to, and so it's just, that's a whole different conversation. But it's just, with that gained perspective, is you can understand this is difficult, but it's not the end of the world. And that no matter what I'm going through here, it might be painful, but it's not unique. Is that millions of people have gone through this kind of stuff for thousands of years. And once you have that greater perspective and understand, look, this is going to pass and I'm doing this for a reason, then it ceases to exist on that level that it did initially, where it has the ability to control you. And I know that may be a little heady or a little out there, but that's kind of how I think about these things and approach these things when I'm in them.
Yeah, I want to see if I can understand the surrender part a little bit more. So basically, one of the things I wrote down was you move towards your fears and you allow them to move into you, but they don't really necessarily influence you per se. So I'm trying to think of, like, what's the dialogue sound like when your feet are hurting like a son of a gun and your hamstrings or your groins are destroyed. Like, what does that sound like in your head?
A lot of it is just I don't complain, because if I did complain, no one's there to listen. And I'm like, what am I supposed to say? Okay, it hurts. Okay, yeah, so what? I get it. It hurts. It's like, if something's not going to be serving me positively in that moment, then I try not to let it, even come into my mindset. Another thing is I don't speak these things, kind of into existence. That if I have these concerns, then maybe I'll have it in my mind. But there's a big difference. And some people touch on this, is that there's a tremendous difference where when you're thinking something versus you start speaking it. And when you speak it, you bring it into existence, you give it even more power and more influence over you.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think what you said, if a thought pattern doesn't serve you, then don't think it. Then focus on something else. Find a different thought pattern that is going to be useful. It's like, yeah, this hurts, but it doesn't do me any good to just continually remind myself that this hurts and that I'm in a lot of pain. Let's focus on something else so that this doesn't influence me. I love that.
Yeah, actually, and just quickly on that is it's important. It's one thing to kind of say it, and it's one thing to kind of do it. Is to say, oh, I'm just going to put this out of my mind. Well, I mean, I've been doing this stuff long enough that can be very difficult at points. So, that's just one thing to keep in mind, is that it takes time. It takes practice. You're not always going to be successful, because look, I wasn't doing that crossing where I was in just some great mood, kind of floating through it and say, oh, I'm not thinking the right things right now, so I'm just going to think about something different that positively serves me. But one thing that we talk about is, what do you surrender into? And what we believe is you surrender into the unknown. And the unknown, what is the unknown? The unknown is just finding a new way of serving your needs and meeting your needs in a more positive way. Because too often in life is we go through life doing the same things, and even though it doesn't serve us, we continue to do them. And the reason we do it is because, not that we're not sick and tired of whatever these things aren't fulfilling us, but we're scared of trying something in a new way, which is, in my mind, the unknown. So that's what you kind of have to force yourself, if you reach that point of saying, listen, I don't know exactly how to fulfill myself in new ways, or what it's going to look like, or what it's going to feel like, but I know it's got to be better than this, or I'm willing to try to think that it's better than this. So you kind of move in those ways. And I found more often than not, even though it's painful and difficult work, it generally reaps rewards and puts me in a better position to be successful.
I love that. You've done a lot of the, like, hiking or walking across the Mojave Desert, rowing across oceans, climbing mountains. I'm sure in the extreme adventure sport space, if you will, there are some of these kind of like go-to goals that people have done in the past, or people aspire to do, or world records that are constantly being chased, if whatnot. But at the same time, there's probably a lot of different options to, like, go after. So how do you come up with the goals that you set for yourself? We were just talking about like, what's the thing that you're currently training for? How do you come up with the goal that is next for yourself? Because one of my profound beliefs is like the goal has to be really important for you to be able to bust your ass as hard as you need to bust your ass in order to be prepared for it. And like, it has to be meaningful to you. So like, how do you come up with what is the next goal for me and ensure that it's meaningful enough for you?
I think you can break that into two areas: is what's your mental psychological goal, and then what's your physical goal. And if you're talking about it on a physical basis, is the way that we came up with Project 7 for Soldiers, which is our current project that we're looking to close out now, is once I kind of got started into climbing, is I heard about the Explorers Grand Slam in 2006 or 2017 when I was in Aconcagua climbing that for the first time, which is the highest peak in South America. And the Explorers Grand Slam is climbing the highest peak on each continent and it's skiing to the North Pole, South Pole. And I heard about a guy that had done it in 12 months, and I just called BS. I was like, it's impossible. Because I knew at that time I was 240 pounds. I had very little experience, very little training, and I knew how much my climbing was taken out of me. I was like, there's no way the human body can possibly, recover and go through all these things in a 12-month period. And then, once I started training all this kind of stuff, a couple of years later, I'm the guy trying to do it in 12 months, let alone crossing the Mojave, rowing the Atlantic Ocean. And at that time, I was supposed to fly a plane around the world. And it just goes to show you that once you have the proper application, all these different things can kind of come into play. But tying it back to 7 for Soldiers is, we're going to try to do the Explorers Grand Slam in a year. I was going to try to become the 4th person to ever complete that in a single year. But looking at it, I was like, well, we got some more time left in this year. I was like, I think I can shoehorn some more stuff in here. And that's how we came up with the Mojave crossing on foot, about rowing the Atlantic Ocean. It was just things that sounded interesting, kind of fun, very challenging. And I wanted the viewers to say, to learn real time if I could do this kind of stuff, is I didn't want this thing to be 100% for sure that, this, I can definitely do that. I can definitely do that. I wanted to be pushed to my absolute physical and emotional limits. And maybe I'd be successful, maybe I wouldn't. But viewers could draw parallels to say, hey, it's his success is not guaranteed, and he's putting it on full display for everybody to see, success or fail. But on the mental element, all this stuff is essentially the same thing mentally. Is that mentally what I'm looking for? I don't care if I'm going out, running around the neighborhood or climbing a mountain somewhere or rowing the ocean, whatever. Is I'm looking to always increase my performance. And what I mean by that is either pushing further, longer, harder, faster, that kind of thing, or just to do it more efficiently and more effectively. Because it's not always about going out there and destroying yourself, but it is always about improving in some capacity. And that's the biggest thing I look for in all these things. Again, whether I'm trekking the Mojave or rowing the Atlantic, is, how did I perform in these situations? And it's just always doing these analyses of, I did well here. I could have done better there. How can I do better here? How can I change things next time? And, you and I talked about it after this, I'm going out for about a 30, 40 mile bike ride. And I'm already starting to prepare myself in my mind about how I'm going to approach that. How am I going to deal with it when my legs start hurting? Because I did a big leg workout yesterday. It's just about improving my performance, on a daily basis. Is how I approach it, from the mental side.
Yeah. I know a big part of this for you, like you had mentioned back when you were in the finance career, you got to the place where you were like kind of just depressed and just down. Like why do you think that doing these sorts of challenges can be so beneficial from a mental health standpoint?
I think it's important to continuously push ourselves on a daily basis. Is that deep down, a lot of us don't want to believe it, but I think we're all built and wired to do hard things. Is that we love to overcome obstacles. And I know in today's day and age, and especially the Western society, is we're getting that bred out of us, and we're getting it marketed out of us, I should say. Because it's always, here's a pill, here's a plan, here's a shortcut, here's a hack. And I can't stand that word hack personally. It's just like, here's the shortcut to go from being unfulfilled to being fulfilled or happy. And that it simply doesn't work. Is the way that you get there is through trial and error and overcoming obstacles and applying yourself. And I think once people start to understand that and to appreciate that and to appreciate it, look, it's not just about the results. And that's something that I falsely started to believe in Seven for Summit or Seven for Soldiers was it's just about getting the next record, the next mountain, how fast can I go, how can this and this and this. And you get caught up in this looking at the result element rather than focusing on the process. And I get that it's overdone to say focus on the journey and not the destination and all this. But look, that's where the magic is. The magic of life is in the journey. And it's not necessarily because, there have been times where I have failed in certain things, but I took more out of that failure than I would have if I had succeeded and than I did from other successes. So it's about that continuous process and overcoming those obstacles and callousing your mind, callousing your body to say, that's what you're looking for, because nothing's accomplished on the couch. Nothing's accomplished when you're comfortable and safe and warm. It's like that's not where the magic is. And that's not certainly where I've taken most of my growth.
Yeah. Well, I want to stay on this sort of topic. So you do these big feats. You train for them for a long time, and then you have this period of time where you essentially have your Super Bowl. And then after that, how do you ensure that there's not a letdown after that? Like, for example, I coach people in a 10-week transformation program, and a lot of people push themselves really hard. And then when 10 weeks is over, sometimes people can sustain their habits. Sometimes people lose their habits. Sometimes people lose the excitement because the goal is over, if you will. So what do you do to ensure that the finish line is actually not a finish line, but it's a new starting line?
This may not be the best answer for you to start off with, but I'll recover it. Is that for me, there's always a letdown.
Yeah.
Look, that's just the truth of it. And what I found was it's very similar to investment banking. We've mentioned my finance career a couple of times. Is that for the last 20 years, I've been involved in mergers and acquisitions where I'm selling, primarily, sometimes buying, but primarily selling companies. And these processes normally take, 10 months on average. And you're just dedicating so much of your time and energy to something. After 10 months, you wake up one day and it's just gone. And you have nothing to show for it. You have a little bit more money in the bank and a little bit more time on your hands. But you're like, what do I do now? It's almost like this postpartum, depression kind of thing. It's just gone. And I found that that's very true with all these physical undertakings that I've had the opportunity to pursue, whether it's, climbing. One of the first one I experienced was climbing Everest. Is I came down into Camp 4, from the summit, and I was just kind of depressed. I was just kind of sad. I was like, I've trained for literally over 2,000 hours to start this off. And I'm like, I've been thinking about this and dreaming about this for years, and now it's over. And that same thing happened every single time. And that kind of ties back to, everyone handles it differently. But it kind of ties back to what we're just saying is about not focusing on some imaginary endpoint, about whether it's, climbing a mountain or rowing an ocean or losing 20 pounds or getting married or having a kid. It's like there are no endpoints in life. There's simply parts along the journey. And that's when I started looking at it in that way. That's how I started to kind of transition that, where I know each time I do experience, some kind of letdown because it's been such an important part of my life. But when, again, it just kind of surrender into life's, flows and processes to say, hey, this was never meant to be an end in and of itself. This was simply another step on my journey going towards something else. So I think when I look at it in that way, and when people look at it in that way, it's less likely to impact you as negatively or for a longer period. You just look at it with the appreciation that it is, learn what you can, and then move on.
Yeah. Now I'm interested. So like for me personally, I have never done maybe the extreme goals that you've done, that's for sure. But I usually like to already know what my next goal is going to be before my current one ends, so that the letdown is lesser or it's shorter and I have something to transition to right away. Is that something you do at all? Or is it like I can't be thinking about what's next because this takes my 100% being to be invested in? Tell me about that. Like, how quickly after you finish one extreme goal do you identify what the next one is?
I don't think I've ever consciously, thought about that question. So it's interesting to me. I think that I'd look at it in depending on the size of the goal. is I've got kind of these macro goals, then I've got micro goals. And the micro goals, I'm able to, kind of look out a couple ahead and say, hey, this will build on this will build on this will build on this. And also in a macro sense, I can apply that to say, hey, say from a project level, is that, here's our first project. Then after this project is done, we'll move on to this project, this project, this project. So that we do as an organization, I certainly do as a person. But when you actually look at the daily approach, to moving towards accomplishing these goals, is with what I'm working on is I clear everything else out of my mind. So when I'm focused on, particular expedition, I'm not thinking 2 more expeditions down the line, the vast majority of the time, just because these things take so much time and energy and dedication that I have to be absolutely laser focused on what I'm doing, because if I don't, it just gets too big. It's, thinking about the project, thinking about sponsors and supporters and all this kind of stuff. It's like, I've got to, at a certain point, I've got to just focus down and not allow anything else to come into my mind. Or else I find that I can get, too distracted, and it just starts to take away from my performance, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. That makes sense. I think the magnitude of the goal has a lot to do with kind of the answer to that question. But what was, you've done so many of these extreme goals and challenges. What has been like the most difficult or painful moment of one of them? Like, what's been the most, like, you were actually in the most pain, or mentally you were just drained or exhausted and you didn't know if you were going to make it? Like, was there any particular moment of one of them that was the most difficult?
Besides this interview? No, I'm kidding. I'm really enjoying it. That's easy for me. Is that in 2021, when I was rowing across the Atlantic Ocean, is we had gone, I think at that point we'd gone 8 for 8 on expeditions, and kind of even getting to that point was going to be a borderline miracle to get there and be successful. We'd done everything. We were successful. And we were about halfway across the Atlantic. And as soon as I got done with the Atlantic, I had about 2 or 3 weeks. I was leaving for the geographic North Pole, or for the North Pole. And then after that, there'd be Australia, and then the Explorers Grand Slam would be done. I'd be the fourth person to ever do it in a year. I was going to be the 3rd fastest person to ever do it in history. This version of it that I was doing, and we got word that Russia invaded Ukraine. And it's obviously my heart went out to the people of Ukraine, because that's just a terrible situation. I can't imagine my homeland being invaded and having to fight for my freedom. And I was actually there a few months before and, discussed this with them firsthand. So it was very fresh in my mind. But what it meant is we spent about the next week trying to find a workaround, because all the trips to North Pole got canceled because of this. And, looking into it, is we had devoted years as an organization. I devoted years of my life. We'd spent, all kinds of money and resources and time and energy and all this kind of stuff. And it was taken away from us. And it's one thing not to be successful because you didn't have the ability to perform to the level required, but to not even get the chance to perform is a whole nother ball game. And I'm sitting there rowing a damn 21-foot boat across the Atlantic Ocean, 12 hours a day. And my heart absolutely broke. It absolutely shattered me. And, I've been through a lot of difficult times in my life, and I can't recall being that low, because I felt like I let everyone down, even though it was outside of my control. Is I felt like I let my sponsors down, my friends, my family, the supporters, like all this kind of stuff. And it was extremely, extremely difficult to deal with. And it took another couple years, since that time. The North Pole has been canceled every year since then. And so we don't know when it's going to open up, finally again. We tried to do it this last year. It got canceled because of some logistical issues. But that was certainly the most difficult time, to deal with.
No, I think there's a huge difference between, like you said, being let down because you weren't able to perform, and versus being let down because you didn't even have the opportunity to perform. Like, how did you get through it? Like, what are some of the things that, if people have a similar experience where they just never got an opportunity to maybe like accomplish the goal that they had been setting out to do, they never got the opportunity to like see if their quote training paid off. What do you do? Like, do you like conversations with other people, mental structures? Like, what are the different things that you did to navigate through that?
Yeah, it ties back what we were talking about a few minutes ago. Is ultimately I chose to surrender into the moment.
Mm.
That and I'm telling you is it makes through through throughout the project. What I found is the more I can surrender into these things, the stronger that I've become. Because is look, with my mentality, it's I'm going to just run into whatever or whomever as many times and as hard as I need to, and then one of us is going to break, and it's not going to be me. But you can only do that effectively for so long in so many situations. And what I found is the more open and fluid and unmoved I can remain, the better I can perform not only for myself, but more importantly, that application or applying that to elevate others. Because that's my ultimate goal in life. Is in this moment is me is I allowed myself the time and the space to experience or to feel and experience the loss of it. But rather than being angry and approaching this thing from a position of anger or resentment or hate or whatever, which is something I would have done a lot of times in my life, is I tried to approach it in a different way. And I just, looked at it as, look, there's nothing special about the pain that I'm going through. It's definitely hurts, but there's nothing unique about it. Is that people all over the world are getting bad news today. Mine just happens to be this. Mm-hmm. And it's so through that surrender, it allowed me to gain additional perspective and to say, listen, even though I lost this thing, I can still live with the sense of purpose I'm trying to live with. I just got to try to find another way of doing it. And, like we talked about a few minutes ago, is what I've also come to understand is through surrender, it creates more space in my life, more figurative space, and allows time to pass without this need for immediate judgment on my situation. And what I found is when I look back at some things that initially I perceive as a failure or something I didn't want, years later, I'm more thankful for that moment of perceived initial failure because I took more away from it than if I would have succeeded in the first place.
Yeah.
So it's the time and perspective and space and understanding that it's look, it's not fun. It's not easy. It's a lot more fun to just get fired up about it and say, oh, I got robbed of this and this, and look and try to be a victim. But it takes a lot more strength to sit back and to not be a victim, but to have that mental and physical, clarity and control to understand that, look, it's just part of it. And unfortunately, we're not always going to get the chance to perform. Most times we will. Most times we can find some kind of workaround. Maybe it's a different performance, a different time, a different application. Sometimes we don't. And look, it's just part of life. If you say, well, it's not fair and it sucks and it's hard. Well, what do you want me to tell you? That's life, Yeah. So let's just get on with it.
No, I love it. I love the two words, surrender and perspective, for sure. Last question here. This has been awesome, Dawson. I really appreciate it. I think a lot of people, after going through something excruciating and painful, one of their first thoughts afterwards is like, I'm never doing that again. And you continue to go through things that are excruciating and painful, and you're like, I'm doing that again and some, to an extent. What is it that keeps you going back for more, even when it is excruciating and painful and uncomfortable?
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking about this last time. So I'm working on my first book, which is coming out in late October, and it's so we're kind of in final edits right now with everything. So this is in the forefront of my mind. Is a lot of times when I get done with something, the first thing I think of is I'm not doing that again. I'm like that hurt more than I thought, or that was more difficult. I was like that's we're going to put that in the closet and leave that alone, not touch it again. But inevitably, a couple hours later, or a couple days later, or a couple weeks later, as I'm thinking about it in my mind, I think about what I took from the experience, and I think about what I could have, what I was happy with, and what I could have done differently. And I think whether it's a physical element or things in my life, I think that's typically how I approach it. Is you kind of sit back, you give it a little bit of time, a little bit of space, then you start to evaluate it, and I see where again, where I performed well and where I could have maybe, acted with more intent or acted with more, insight, or I could have remained a little bit more unmoved and things like that. So it's just and this ties back to what we talked about a couple minutes ago, rather than looking at this whole thing from a 10,000 foot level and trying to, look at the whole apple, is I look at these individual little bites. Because when I think about, that recent crossing you mentioned, the Mojave, is that, man, I'll be honest with you, that hurt. It really hurt. It turned into just how much pain could I take and how long could I take it? But when I look at it in each individual moment, I look at a moment saying, hey, I did well in this moment. I could have done better in that moment, in that moment, in that moment. So when I look at applying that to new things I'm pursuing, I don't look at climbing, 20,000 foot mountain. I look at every 10 foot. How can I perform in that 10 feet or that 10 feet? That it's all these little things. And when you focus on the little bitty things, again, this is an overused cliche. You focus on the small things, big things take care of themselves. But that's really how this stuff works, is you can't look at it in these big grand scales. It's how could I better apply myself and learn and grow and perform in these little bitty moments? And then kind of where can I apply that in activities going forward? And that's just, that's personally how I use it. And it seems to work out pretty well so far.
Yeah, no, I like it. I think, right after a really tough experience, it's hard to have that perspective, but you have that space that creates perspective. Also, it kind of gives you the perspective that pain is temporary, that this hurt like a son of a gun in the moment, and maybe the day or days thereafter, but in the weeks or weeks thereafter, you're like, oh, it's gone now. And that gives you maybe the juice to be like, oh, we got to do something else. So, no, this has been awesome, Dawson. I really appreciate it. If you guys need to follow, make sure you go follow Matt on Instagram at Dawson Speak. You can also find his website, dawsonspeak.com. You talked about your new book coming out late October. Tell everybody the title of it and what day it comes out. If you know, I know sometimes
it's Only the Strong Surrender. And it's right now it's looking to drop October 22nd, and you're excited about it. It's the first book, but basically, long story short, what it is it's a combination of my journey, a narration of my personal journey, and also Project 7 for Soldiers, all the things that we face both on from an expedition standpoint, then kind of back off the stuff. A lot of times you hear these things, you don't get to hear about and learn about all the stuff that went off, around in the background, but also, lessons that I learned along the way that can apply to everyone's journey. Also a section of meditations, which are like the 12 to 13 major takeaways that come from Strength and Surrender that I've used and applied, throughout this. And then finally, little sections where you can ask yourself and prepare yourself, where you take, what I've learned, along my journey, what I can share with you. And you really ask yourself these sensitive questions and start to do the work that you need to do. And then prepare yourself about how you can actually apply these different lessons, into your, everyday life or these larger events that you're trying to pursue.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Only the Strong Surrender out late October, maybe October 22nd. We'll make sure we have all that stuff linked up in the show notes so that people can go grab it. I love the surrender and perspective. I love those thought processes. I love so many different things that you said today, Dawson. It's been an absolute joy to get into your head and learn the mental structures and thought patterns that have allowed you to both make the transition in your career that's been a purpose-filled transition, and for you to be able to endure the crazy feats that you've been able to endure. So I appreciate you sharing that with me. I appreciate you sharing that with us today. Is there any other place that people should go follow you? We got your website, your Instagram, the book.
Yeah, I think that on the website and Instagram will link you to everything else. So that's good. Just dawsonspeak.com. That also links to dawsonspeakfoundation.org, which is our 501c3. And as you mentioned, Instagram just at Dawson's Peak, and you can find everything.
Beautiful. Well, you got the book coming out. You got maybe another endurance challenge coming at some point in the near future as well. So you make sure you go follow him on Instagram so you can watch his journey. I was actually going back and watching some of your stuff from the Mojave Desert, and I was like, holy crap, this looks absolutely brutal. So if you guys want to go back and rewatch some of that stuff to learn some of the stuff in the moment, it was really entertaining to go watch as well and follow him for the future ones. But Dawson, that's all we got today. Really appreciate your time, man. That was great.
Hey, thank you. I really enjoyed it as well. I appreciate your time.
What an inspiring episode. Matt shared some incredible insights on mental endurance and how to push through extreme challenges, both physically and mentally. Before we wrap up, don't forget to hit the follow button on the Apple Podcast app and on Spotify. If you're listening there, go ahead and click that follow button. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to our channel, because you guys do not want to miss any of the future episodes coming out that are going to continue to inspire you and provide you with actionable insights to get closer to the best version of yourself. Now, from today's interview with Matt, my 3 biggest takeaways are the following. Number 1, to develop mental toughness, you need to both surrender and have perspective. To surrender means to move towards your fears and not let them influence you. Number 2, set both psychological goals and physical goals. Set physical goals that aren't guaranteed to be achieved, and set psychological goals that are going to continue to grow you and improve you. And then third and finally, after achieving a big goal, yeah, there might be a letdown, but realize that there are no endpoints in life, that there are just steps along the journey. If you can do these things, if you can harness these kinds of mental structures and thought patterns, you'll continue to get closer to the healthiest version of yourself and ultimately closer and closer to your best you.